The number of American retirees moving abroad has increased by almost 50% since 2008. That's according to the Social Security Administration. More seniors than ever are making the move to countries like Ecuador, Italy, Mexico, and Japan. The primary motivation? Retirees say their savings stretch further overseas. With lower healthcare costs, more affordable housing, and great weather, many Americans over 65 are embracing life abroad. Some countries, like Costa Rica and the Philippines, even offer special visas and tax incentives to attract new residents. Holly and Mark Deckard moved to Cuenca, Ecuador 3 years ago. A city International Living magazine recently named one of the top overseas retirement destinations. The couple were both born and raised in St. Louis and lived in the area their entire lives. Neither one had spent much time outside of the United States. But about 10 years ago, when a family friend shared their positive experience with moving abroad, the Deckards started thinking more about the possibility.
It's warm all the time. They don't have heat or air conditioning because the weather is always great, and all that stuff, and very inexpensive to live. And that's what kind of got me thinking about it. And then I started researching a little bit, and Ecuador kind of kept popping up as a desirable location. And I just, researched a little bit more, and then we visited in 2019. And a few months after that, I got laid off, and I really didn't want to continue working, and did the math, and hey, let's move down to Ecuador.
Mark says his wife Holly thought he was crazy, but the more they researched, the better the idea sounded. Holly says they were planning to check out Panama, Costa Rica, and Mexico, but once they visited Cuenca, they knew their search was over.
Once we came, I fell in love with this city immediately. I mean, they call it the Athens of South America. It feels very European. The weather is always, like right now, I'm wearing a sweater because this week it's been a little chilly, which means the highs are only in the mid 60s. Normally it's closer to 70 or mid 70s the rest of the year.
In their eyes, there are lots of benefits to living in Cuenca. On top of the good weather, the couple are eating healthier and enjoying lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. They say their neighborhood is very walkable and that travel within Ecuador is inexpensive. Most of all, they appreciate that the cost of living is cheap and affordable compared to U.S. prices.
I'd say it costs about half. Our day-to-day expenses are about half what they would be in the U.S. I wouldn't classify us as economic refugees. We could technically afford to still live in the U.S., but our lifestyle would be much reduced, and we'd probably both have regular part-time jobs to supplement our retirement.
They believe their standard of living is much better in Cuenca than it would have been had they stayed in St. Louis.
We had an apartment, a furnished apartment, our first 2 years to make sure we wanted to stay. And then now we have a house with a yard, and I have a studio, which has enabled me to have ceramic students. It would be considered a 4-bedroom house. We don't have it set up that way with an office, and it's 2,500 square feet?
But with your studio, it's about 2,300.
And we're paying $900 a month. And our utilities are only around $60. That's electric and gas.
That 900 is a little on the high side. It's only because we're kind of in a desirable location.
Right. Well, we have a yard, a very nice front and backyard, which most people in the city don't really have that. The houses are more like row houses close together,
Living in Ecuador, the Deckards can afford to eat out at nice restaurants whenever they feel like it. They also travel several times a year: Australia, Hawaii, Europe, including visits to the States to see their children.
We can travel and pay for them to come visit us. We don't have to worry about draining our savings.
Another cost savings? Healthcare. Both Holly and Mark are in their early to mid-60s, so they don't qualify for Medicare. Instead, they opted into a U.S. health insurance policy for catastrophic care and only pay out of pocket for day-to-day medical needs and office visits.
Here, the healthcare, even if you're paying out of pocket without insurance, it's not going to bankrupt you. And they have there's 4 or 5 hospitals here in Cuenca. It's a university town. There's 5 universities. There's great medical facilities. They do have, and we joined their universal health care, which is more minimal and is struggling because it's not mandatory. So a lot of people are not part of it. But Mark had so many pre-existing conditions, and we wanted to get into that system in case we needed, because the insurance here is pretty much like the U.S. If you have a pre-existing condition, they don't cover it.
Once they had their health care sorted out, the process of moving was fairly straightforward. Like other migrants, the couple did have to navigate the visa process. Today, they are not citizens, but like many others in Ecuador, are considered permanent residents.
You can come to Ecuador and stay for 90 days without doing it just with your passport. If you want to stay longer, you can apply for a 90-day extension. But beyond that, you need to apply for a temporary resident visa. And that's what we did. And that's a 2-year visa.
And then after that, you can apply for a permanent visa, which it never expires as long as we follow the rules, which is the first 3 years, we can't be out of the country for more than 6 months total each year. And then after 3 years, though, we can be gone for as much as 5 years. And, and then we don't lose it. So for our lifetime, we don't have to become citizens. We can just be permanent residents.
But moving to a foreign country isn't all smooth sailing. There's often a language barrier to consider. Neither of them spoke Spanish before they relocated. They hired an online teacher from Cuenca and took Zoom lessons a year before moving to the city.
At this point, our functional Spanish, like for shopping, taxis, restaurants, I'd say is really good, but we've still got a ways to go. At our age, learning a new language is hard.
Like the Deckards, David Morrill is an expat who moved to Cuenca from the U.S. Morrill has been living in Cuenca for nearly 20 years, and he says there can be an adjustment period for new arrivals. Morrill points out that there can also be tension between new residents from the U.S. and the native population in Ecuador.
We're creatures of our own culture. Obviously, we're going to have a lot of touchstones with that culture, in most cases, North America, somewhat in Europe. And the language barrier keeps some people, there's little clusters of expats who get together at bars and clubs and whatnot and sort of stand off from the rest of the culture, partly because of the security of communicating with it.
He says, in addition to the language barrier, dealing with foreign bureaucracy is frustrating.
You're dealing constantly, a lot, particularly at the beginning, with bureaucracy, which is very thick and very arduous here to navigate. So, a lot of the expats here have what you call facilitators. They'll have a local person who helps them with their visa issue, with banking for various things, medical issues. So there's many shocks. And they keep coming no matter how long you've been in a place.
Morrill says navigating cultural differences around things like women's rights is also something to consider before relocating.
I would say this is true of any place in Latin America. The machismo is a very strong element in this culture. And it's changing. It's changing fairly fast, but we're probably, 30 years behind the U.S. Before I left Florida, I was on a board of directors of a domestic violence center. So I was kind of immersed in that. So the women are they have quite a ways to go in the equality issues, same as in the U.S. And this also applies to racial issues. I'm from a mixed family. I raised 2 African-American children. So I'm conscious of that here quite a bit.
Preparing for these kinds of cultural shocks is key to any transition when moving abroad.
Probably the big point of becoming an is the question of how do you become an expat? How do you prepare for it? That's a big issue because a lot of people are not prepared for it. They come down here expecting a lower cost of living, which is true, but they don't come expecting the huge cultural shock. I mean, they may be intellectually aware of that, but they're not really ready to accommodate it. So you really need to be prepared. You need to make, wherever you're thinking of moving overseas, you need to have a preparatory trip and spend some time there and see how it feels to you. Don't make a rash decision based on, say, saving money or something else that's advertised. You need to spend some time in the area where you're thinking of moving.
You can learn more about this topic by visiting our website at viewpointsradio.org, where you'll also learn more about all of our past guests. For more behind the scenes, follow Viewpoints Radio on Instagram, X, and Facebook. This segment was written and produced by Polly Hansen. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Our studio engineer is Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.